Okay, U.S. history. Uh, I filmed this, or I did this as a, where you could see me today, because I want to make sure you see me and hear me say this thing. Got to do your work. Some of you are doing great. Some of you are really on top of it. Some of you kind of float in and out a little bit. Some of you are way behind and not keeping up. And I get it. I know it's weird, but all I can tell you is this is a class you need to graduate. It is a unique time that we live in, but work still needs to be done, and you'll still have to earn the grade. And there won't be any grade giveaways. So if you're not keeping up on the work, unfortunately, you're going to make it so that you end up failing and end up having to retake the class, and that's not what anybody wants. I don't want that. You don't want that. So you need to keep up on that work. We had a document of the week last week due on Thursday because we didn't have school on Friday, and the numbers were way higher than usual, which were already too high to miss those. You have a new document of the week today. It's really easy. It's the Bill of Rights, which is what we taught all of last week. Get that done. Get that out of the way. Just do it today. Don't wait until Friday. I know you can turn it in as late as the start of your class on Friday. That is honestly the not smart way to do things because too many things can happen too late. Try to get it done today or Tuesday and be done with it. Honors, you do not have a document of the week this week because you have your essay. For honors and honors only, your essay is due at the start of class tomorrow. Today, we're going to finish all the amendments. That's it. We're going to be done. Again, these are more straightforward. They're all incredibly important, but they're more straightforward, so we can go through them a little bit quicker. At the end, there's going to be a formative review. That is not graded, but it is great practice because I take questions right off of those. They end up on worksheets and they end up on the test. And speaking of the test, it's Friday. If you do not know the Northwest Ordinance, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, if those don't sound familiar to you, you better go back 2 weeks. If you don't know all 27 amendments, and you're going to learn like 16 through 27 today, but if you don't know your first 15 so far, you need to go back and watch last week's because this is all in the test. And this test is easy if you have good notes, and it is nearly impossible if you don't, unless you happen to just know all of your amendments, which is fine. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to finish up the amendments today, and then you're going to have the rest of the class time that you would normally spend to make sure you have your document of the week done and do your formative. So let's share screen and look at our notes. So we have taken notes on most of this already. We've taken notes on the first 10 amendments, which we call our Bill of Rights. And just the other day, we took amendments 11 through 15, okay? It finished up with the Reconstruction Amendments or the Civil War Amendments 13, 14, and 15. So we're picking up today at 16. We're going through the end, and then that's it for notes for this particular unit. Okay, 16th Amendment. The government has a right to tax your income. It's just that easy. The government has a right to tax your income. So this is how our government, it didn't used to be, but this is how our government pays for most of the things we get. Anything that we have as a public service has to be paid for by somebody, and it's paid for by you and I through our taxes. So that would include the roads, it would include teachers and schools, firemen, policemen, anything government, anything. Any sort of school lunch program, any sort of assistance, welfare, anything along those lines, anything for our military, all of this is provided by taxes. That's why we have to pay taxes. Now, there are other types of taxes like sales tax. You go buy a $100 item, it costs $107 because there's tax on it, there's sales tax, but this is taxing your income. So I'm sure you've done this before, but if you've ever had a job, let's say you were making $10 an hour and I'll make it $8.50. Let's say you're making $8.50 an hour and you worked 40 hours and you took out a calculator and you figured out, oh, I'm going to make $340. You're not, because you have to pay your income tax. Now, what you do is you take that as a good rule of thumb. I'm just using this as an estimate. I estimate that most people pay about 30% in income tax. So I just take whatever I think I'm going to make and I multiply it by 0.7. That means I'm trying to figure out what 70% of that is. And I come up with the number 238. That's probably what most people would make. If they were making 340, they'd take home about $238. That's off a little bit here and there, but that's because they're using their 16th Amendment right to tax you. Now, here's the good news for you as minors. You do not technically have all of your rights because you're not an adult. Your parents possess them for you. Because of that, if you file a tax return, you almost always get all of your money back, because since you don't have the full rights until you're 18, until your parents, I mean, you have them, but your parents kind of possess them for you, you don't have to pay all the taxes. Once you become 18, once you're an adult, you get a little bit of that money back, sometimes a little bit more, kind of depending on this or that, but it's not automatic by any stretch. So the government has a right to tax your income, and they use it to pay for all the things that we need. Direct election of senators by the people. Some of these, actually all of these amendments, 16 through 27, we're actually going to talk about twice. We're going to talk about in this lecture, and then we're going to talk about them like in the context of the era that they pass. So it used to be that senators were appointed, and it turned out there were a lot of crooked senators. So we made it so we elect them. It's just that simple. The senators from Ohio are chosen by Ohio citizens. Every state chooses their citizens. They run, we elect them. So right now we have Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman, one Democrat, one Republican. The people of Ohio have chosen those senators. If we think that one of them does something that we don't like, we can go to the polls and vote that person out and vote another person in. Just that simple. 18th Amendment. Alcohol is made illegal. And if you're saying to yourself, well, hold on. Maybe my parents or somebody, I've seen them have alcohol. Of course, it's not illegal. It isn't now. It was at the time. There was a time where alcohol was made an illegal substance. And we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about this thing called cause and effect. And boy, was this one an unpredicted cause and effect. Because when we made alcohol illegal, when the US made it illegal, they thought, oh, this will end drinking. It did not end drinking. People kept drinking. In some areas, drinking went up. In most of the areas, it went down. But in urban areas in particular, it went up. And what it did was it led to the rise of organized crime, because now instead of buying alcohol from businesses, they were buying them from illegal suppliers, mostly from the mob. So men like Al Capone made a lot more money than they'd ever made before, and organized crime became a lot more organized. This ended up getting repealed, and there's going to be another amendment that will show you that. That will remind you of that. 19th Amendment. Women gained the right to vote. About time. We told you that African-American men got the right to vote in 1868. That was far beyond when it should have been. It should have been, obviously, with the original Constitution itself. But as long as that group had to wait, I can't believe women had to wait another 50 years beyond that. Let's talk about cause and effect there. First off, we can go cause and effect. Why did women get the right to vote? Well, it had a lot to do with the fact that women's roles in society were not valued like they should have been. But during World War I, which occurred right before this passed, women were working in factories all of a sudden. We were short on men working in factories. So women were working in factories and contributing in ways that many Americans were not accustomed to seeing. And they were doing a fantastic job. So an effect of that is people said, you know what, women are worthy of our respect and admiration. They should have the right to vote. Or you can do cause and effect for, well, what happens once women get the right to vote? Well, I'll give you a real simple effect. It doubles the number of voters. That's a big deal. It doubles the number of voters. You could also say people pay more attention to issues that women are more concerned with, which, and it sounds stereotypical, but the data kind of bears out that women are often more concerned with social issues, more so than necessarily financial issues. There are obviously exceptions, but it changes the way that people run for office. It changes the way that people frame the importance of the issues. But this cause and effect idea, it's nothing you have to take notes on, but it's something you have to think through, because there's going to be questions on the test. Cause and effect is an easy concept, though. Think about it like this. Cause and effect. You study for a test, effect. You do well on the test. Or we can do the negative version of that. You blow off a test, you don't prepare for it, you fail a test. Cause and effect. Okay. 20th Amendment. This one sounds more complicated than it is. If a president is in office and they run for re-election and they don't win, we call them a lame duck. That just means like an injured duck. It's a weird phrase to use for this. But basically, Jimmy Carter in 1980, he was president from 1976 to 1980. He loses his re-election to Ronald Reagan. But you don't just take over like the next day. So for the next couple months, Jimmy Carter's president, but everybody knows he's not going to be for much longer. He's what you call a lame duck president. If Donald Trump were to lose in November, he would be a lame duck president for a couple months because everybody would know, oh, Joe Biden's going to be the next president. You're not as powerful in that time. You're absolutely still the president, but your political influence isn't as strong. Now, that time period between when you get elected, November, first Tuesday in November, and when you took office used to be November to March. They shortened that up to January. So no matter who wins, they'll technically be sworn in January of 2021. Now, if it's Trump again, there's really no, it's not as ceremonial just because it's just another term for him. If it is somebody different, then it seems a little bit more earth-shattering, not earth-shattering, but a bigger deal. Same thing with Barack Obama. When he won re-election, it wasn't as big of a deal then for him to be sworn into office again. When he won the first time, that was a bigger deal. Okay, so it shortens that time though between when you get elected and when you take office, just because travel times now are much more reasonable. Okay, you know how many we got left. We got to get through 27 and then we're done, but then no more notes this week. 21st Amendment repeals the 18th. What a boring amendment, but that's what it does. It is the United States saying, we give up. We're not going to make alcohol illegal anymore. It just repeals it. So I believe that happens in 1933. So alcohol was made illegal right around 1920. I may be off a little bit on that. And we just gave up on that and said, oh boy, that didn't work at all. And so now obviously you have to be 21 to purchase alcohol, but it is legal for adults. You can't drink and drive and you can't drink in a lot of public places, but alcohol is legal because of the 21st Amendment. 22, limit on presidential terms. This is simple. It just limits how long he can be president. We have no kings in our country. So George Washington set what we call precedent, which just means he was the first guy to do this. George Washington ran for president twice and won twice. And he could have run and won a third time or a fourth time or a fifth time. As long as he would have lived, he would have kept winning. That's just the way it was. But after 2 full terms, he said, you know what? I'm out. I think this is enough. And then after that, everybody just followed that precedent. It wasn't a law. It just was the precedent. Everybody just said, well, you know, if it was good enough for George Washington, I'm not going to run more than twice. 8 years is enough. That worked until this man, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He won presidency in 1932. He then ran for re-election in 1936. So it's pretty typical so far. If he would have followed the precedent, he would have left in 1940. But he felt that he had to, and that's not against the law at that time, to break the precedent and run for a third term because we still were dealing with the Depression, and more importantly, we were getting really close to a world war. A world war was starting around us. It started in 1939, and he just said, I just feel like you need steady leadership, so I'm going to run again. So he won in 1940. Then we were in the middle of World War II, and he ran again in 1944. Now, he died in April of 45. So he ended up serving for president for 4 terms, but only 13 years, not 16. He didn't live long enough for that. And people said, even people who liked FDR, and I would be in this group, said, okay, but that's a dangerous precedent. You don't want people to just be president as long as they, once they run and then until they die. So they made this amendment that said, from now on, it's now a rule. You can only serve 2 terms. But there is one weird exception. You can be president for up to 10 years. And what that is put in there for is if a president is serving and he dies in office, or she dies in office, the vice president becomes president. And what they're saying is if you are serving less than 2 years, that vice president that becomes president can run 2 more full times. Now, if the president were to die a year into office and that vice president was president for 3 years, they'd only be able to run 1 time. I hope that makes sense. It's a little quirky, but it is logical. So you have 2 full terms is all you're allowed to serve. But in the weird situation that you happen to come into office because you were a vice president and the president died, you could serve a total of 10 years. Okay. This one we're going to get into later. Believe it or not, this has to do with the civil rights movement. And this is a big deal. But Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, is a city, and it's not in a state. It's not in a state because our forefathers wanted the capital to not be within any one particular state. So it's its own little world. There are a lot of people in that city has more people in it than a couple of the states. And because they weren't a state, they didn't get electoral votes. Now that's a whole other thing that we'll get into more in government class. But if you don't have electoral votes, and every state does, so all of us are represented by the Electoral College, except for this group, your votes for president didn't count, which is insane. So they gave them electoral votes. That's probably very confusing to you. I understand. I'm probably not going to emphasize that a lot on the test, but it is a big deal because Washington, D.C.'s votes for president didn't count before that, and they should. And that Washington, D.C. had a large minority population, and so this was tied into the civil rights movement because you had a lot of people who were not really having their vote counted. 24th Amendment. Poll tax, absolutely tied to the Civil Rights Amendment again, or Civil Rights Movement again. 24th Amendment. It used to be that people were charged a tax to vote in some communities. Now, in some communities, they charge this tax to everybody. But in many Southern communities, this was another way around the 15th Amendment. What they were doing was they were saying, oh, there's this tax on voting, but they were selectively enforcing it against minorities. Your right to vote is a right. And this makes it clear. There's no tax on that. If there was a tax on voting, poor people, whether black, white, Hispanic, whatever, would not have as easy of an ability to vote. And so this making a poll tax, a tax on voting, making it illegal, makes it so that it's easier for anyone to vote. 25th Amendment. Home stretch, guys. 25th Amendment. Presidential disability and secession. This just spells out. Something happens to the president. Obviously, the vice president is president, but what happens to if God forbid, the president and the vice president were to be harmed? This comes about to some degree because of nuclear war. We have nuclear weapons by this point, and people start to realize, oh my gosh, you could potentially lose 8 or 9 people in secession to be president. What do we do? And so this amendment establishes that the president dies, then it goes to the vice president, and then it goes through positions, a couple positions in Congress, and then all of the cabinet members. And there's like 20 cabinet members. So you have this very definitive list, and it would be catastrophic and it would be sad, but literally the way it's set up is if there was a nuclear war and 18 people on this list died, it would be, again, very sad, but there would be no confusion. We would go, oh, okay, Secretary of Education is the next one up, or whatever it is. There's a list, and it just says, here's who's up next. So again, would it be devastating? Yes, but there would be no like civil war over who has the right to rule the country, because you can't have that sort of chaos if something catastrophic like that happened. Now, if you're saying to yourself, well, what if they're all in the same place? They're never all in the same place. So even when the president gives a presidential address or an inaugural address, they purposely take at least one of those people and send them off somewhere far away. There was a TV show for a while, I think on CBS, called Designated Survivor. It's the same idea. It's the idea that, well, just in case this horrible thing happens, at least we have this one person over here, and it just rotates. It is used fairly often, not fairly often, but it has been used multiple times when the president has enabled the 25th Amendment because they were about to have a surgery. So, for example, Ronald Reagan was having a minor surgery, and he was going to be under anesthesia. So he just said, okay, I invoke the 25th Amendment. George Bush, you're technically president until I come out of anesthesia. And then 12 hours later, he's back to being president. There was some concern that when Donald Trump first went to Walter Reed Medical Center with coronavirus, that they would have to just temporarily invoke the 25th Amendment if he got too sick, if he were ever unconscious, anything like that. I'm sure they were prepared to do that, but he never got to that point, so it wasn't necessary. If though, something had happened and maybe, God forbid, he had to be on a ventilator or something like that, then the vice president assumes the role of the president until the president is better. Okay, last two amendments. This one is an easy one for cause and effect. 18-year-olds can vote. This came about because of the Vietnam War. It used to be you had to be 21 to vote. So this amendment essentially gives voting rights to people who are between the ages of 18 and 20. Before that, you had to be 21. And the reason this came about is because there was a draft for the Vietnam War. You could, starting at age 18, just get selected, if you're a guy, to have to go and fight in the Vietnam War. And there's a pretty good argument that a lot of 18-year-olds made and said, hold on, I'm old enough to serve my country, potentially die for my country, but not vote for the leaders who send me to go do that. That does seem a little crazy. And so with enough pressure, the effect of those protests was, okay, 18-year-olds can vote. Now, if I go cause and effect on 18-year-olds voting, well, I guess you could argue that 18-year-olds have a tendency to vote for issues that affect younger people more than older people. That makes sense. Unfortunately, young people don't vote. They do, but they don't vote in big numbers. If you go by who's likely to vote, the younger you are, the less likely you are to vote. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote, and that holds true all the way through about 80. Now, after 80, it starts to tail off a little bit because it is physically harder for some people over 80 to get to the polls, but they're still vote. 80 plus still votes at a more regular pace than 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. If 18, 19, and 20-year-olds voted in mass numbers, like 80% of them or something like that, you would see more youthful issues being out there. For example, college would be cheaper. That's just the way it is. But as it is, older people are far more likely to vote. So you see those issues getting more attention. Young people vote in big numbers, young people will get listened to more. That's just cause and effect. That's just the way that is. And your last amendment, it is the most boring amendment. It literally passed while I was in college, so it's not exactly a new amendment. And it won't let me show it to you. Well, anyway, wow, the screen just went crazy there. 27th Amendment, Congress cannot give itself a pay raise for its current session of Congress. If Congress says, we're going to double our salary, before that pay raise goes into effect, you get at least one chance to vote out everybody who voted for that pay raise. Okay. I guess it's nice, but it's not. I don't think it seems worthy of an amendment, but that's fine. So those are all of your amendments. I went through those kind of quickly. We're going to do some reinforcement activities Tuesday, Wednesday. Well, if we have school Wednesday, we'll do reinforcement activities this week, and the test is Friday. Right? Go out there, get your document of the week done for the week. Just be done with it. You're going to have a review worksheet on all of the amendments this week, and you're going to have a test on Friday. So keep up, get the grade that you want to, that represents you, that you want to represent you. All right, everybody, have a good day.